Hello and welcome to this episode of Standard Deviation, my column and video series. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at ThePrint, and I'm going to be speaking to you about the new challenge facing RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das and how it's something he hasn't faced before. Shaktikanta Das has successfully helmed the RBI through several challenges, including turning around the banking sector from its non-performing assets crisis and steering it through the pandemic. But now he's up against a new challenge, something he hasn't encountered before in his tenure, a strong pushback against his policies from the Government of India. Tussles between the central bank and the Ministry of Finance aren't new. Going back to the RBI's second governor in independent India, Benegal Rama Rao, and his widely publicized spats with then Finance Minister T.T. Krishnamachari. Over the years, such tussles have made the news time and time again. Das, however, has so far kept his head down and his nose clean. Despite having a term longer than most RBI governors, there has not been an inkling of any disagreements he's had with the finance ministry, at least until now. The next few weeks, which are incidentally the last of his current tenure as governor, leaving all the rumors of a possible extension aside, will see how successfully he can navigate the latest butting of heads between the government and the RBI. Will he retain his independence and hold his ground by leaving interest rates unchanged, as he has strongly hinted he will do? Or will he bow before government pressure, which is ramping up, and cut rates? Problematically, cutting rates would certainly help the economy, but would now be seen as weakness on the governor's part. Keeping rates unchanged would display strength, but it's questionable if it would be the right move for the economy. The latest reason for the RBI and government to make their contrasting views public has been the vexatious issue of inflation and its relation to central bank interest rates. Things haven't yet become as ugly or sensational as such tussles have in the past, but the situation is nevertheless significant. After raising rates in stages to 6.5% in the wake of the pandemic, the RBI's Monetary Policy Committee in October this year decided to keep rates high and unchanged for the 10th consecutive time. It did, however, change its stance to neutral, indicating that it was more ready to cut rates in the future. While this change in stance was seen as a signal that the MPC could cut rates as soon as December, when it meets next, the RBI governor and other senior officials have put paid to that notion. A change in stance doesn't mean there will be a rate cut in the very next monetary policy meeting, the governor said at a summit earlier this month. It's tough to get more categorical than that. With October's retail inflation coming in at 6.2%, higher than the RBI's upper comfort bound of 6%, it might seem that, at least on the face of it, the MPC was right in not cutting rates. The problem is that most of this inflation was driven by vegetable price inflation, something the central bank has no control over. While several economists have made this point, the matter escalated when the government adopted the same position. About a week after Das made his statement, Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal raised the issue in an equally unequivocal way. Food inflation has nothing to do with managing inflation, Goyal said, adding that he believed the RBI should cut interest rates. This was the first time since Das took over that a union minister has spoken about this. A few days later, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman too added her voice to the debate, saying that bank interest rates would have to be far more affordable to fuel India's growth ambitions. The jitters on the part of the government stem from the fact that nearly all indicators of growth are pointing towards a slowdown. The expectation is that the second quarter GDP growth numbers, to be released at the end of this month, will come in at about 6.5%. This would not only be slower than what had earlier been predicted for the quarter, but also slower than the 6.7 growth seen in Q1. And even that 6.7 was an unpleasant surprise. Despite this, Das and the RBI have stuck to their guns so far. The governor has focused on price stability in all his subsequent speeches, and the RBI's latest State of the Economy report said October's high inflation vindicated the central bank's warnings against complacency due to inflation coming lower than 6% in July and August. But the thing is, in nearly every past disagreement between the government and the RBI, it's been the government that has come out on top. When Benegal Ramarao locked horns with TT Krishnamachari over the finance ministry apparently stepping into the RBI's domain, it was Rao who resigned in a huff. More recently, it was Raghuram Rajan who quit as RBI governor despite his rockstar image when push came to shove between him and former finance minister Arun Jaitley over things like demonetization and Rajan's outspokenness. Though Rajan later said that he had told the government he was against demonetization, as we all know now, the government went right ahead with it under his successor Urjit Patel. In other words, the government got its way. Similarly, it was Deputy Governor Viral Acharya who resigned after his headline-grabbing comments about the government impinging on the RBI's autonomy by, amongst various things, asking for large dividends. Compounding the RBI's loss in this argument is the fact that it transferred a record-breaking rupees 2.1 lakh crore of dividends to the government in 2023-24. This has effectively ended any debate on what should happen to the RBI's dividends. Simultaneously, RBI Governor Urjit Patel was having his own tussle with the government over the Prompt Corrective Action or PCA framework for banks. Basically, the government said the norms were too strict and were hurting banks that were already ailing, while the RBI said that the strictness was necessary for the health of the banking system. Patel resigned even before his 3-year tenure ended, citing personal reasons. Shaktikanta Das took over as RBI governor in December 2018. Rather than fight the government over the PCA framework, he instead focused on improving the health of the banks within the framework. As a result, by 2023, restrictions were lifted on all of the banks on which the PCA framework had been imposed. The strictness of the framework became a moot point. Das was also a ready and willing ally to the government during the COVID-19 pandemic, increasing liquidity in the system when it was needed and facilitating the various credit guarantee schemes that the government implemented. It of course helped that he had been a secretary in the Ministry of Finance before becoming RBI governor. He knows how the ministry works and how to get things done in government without creating a ruckus. However, there's no getting around the fact that if he does cut rates in December, it'll look like he's bowing to government pressure. Even though various economists have called for the delinking of food inflation from the overall inflation targeting framework, Das and the RBI have stood firm. Food inflation is an integral part of inflation targeting and cannot be ignored, they've argued. It's also not as if the Q2 GDP numbers will come as a surprise to the RBI. It maintains a very close watch over nearly all high-frequency indicators of the economy. So one can't even argue that a rate cut, if it comes, was necessitated by the poor growth numbers. If growth was a big enough concern, the governor would have said so. He's been quite transparent like that. Similarly, even if November inflation eases, Das would be inconsistent with his past record if he allowed a single month's data to sway his decision. In a nutshell, even if Das does the right thing and cuts rates, it's going to look like he did so only because the government asked him to. An unfortunate blip in an otherwise stellar tenure as a strong governor. But on that note, that's all from me. Thank you for watching.